Hey, Jer, did you know there's wrestling outside of the United States?
Yeah, but it's not as good.
Well, we're talking about New Japan here. This time, I'm wrestling with the business.
Ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages, welcome back to another exciting episode of Wrestling with the Business. I, as always, am your host, Jeremy Baudet, and with me, as always, is the man, the myth, the legend himself, Matthew More Than Man Lambert. Welcome back, Matt.
Glad to be here.
So, we've taken a little extended break, did a couple special edition episodes, and I think we should add to that by expanding our horizons a little bit. We talk a lot about WWE, talk a lot about AEW, and I think this would be a good time to look east. That way's east. Look east and consider some of the excellent wrestling that's taking place over in Japan, specifically Wrestle Kingdom 14 just took place, which I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, is New Japan Pro Wrestling's equivalent of WrestleMania.
That's right.
Basically. I'm not particularly familiar with this, so I just maybe want to walk through the results with you and maybe have you talk a little bit about kind of what went on. Unlike most of the large-scale shows that take place in the United States, New Japan has this as a two-night event, which is particularly interesting.
First time
so we're
ever.
going to split this up by night, and I just want to walk through some of the big points that happen, and maybe we can talk about some of the takeaways. So on night one, Jon Moxley took on Lance Archer in a Texas death match. How did the Texas death match go over? How did New Japan fans like it? Were they familiar with it? I mean, that doesn't sound like something that would be very common over on that side.
There is actually a very large history of death matches, quote-unquote death matches in Japan. Basically, the match was just what WWE fans would know as a last man standing match. It's just some chairs, some kendo shots, some tables, and you had to keep your opponent down for a 10 count. I don't think it was quite as brutal as the Moxley Omega Lights Out match, though, in AEW. But the finish was rough. For those who don't know what the Japanese tables are like in New Japan, they're about half the width of a WWE table and twice as thick. Those suckers are painful. And the finish came when Moxley did his paradigm shift, or in New Japan it's called the Death Rider. Pretty sick name. He did the Death Rider off the apron to the floor through two tables. And the way Archer landed on his table, it was brutal. But the big takeaway was Moxley won, and he became the IWGP United States Champion for a second time.
Wait a minute, for the second time, I thought he was the champion before.
He was the champion and then had to relinquish the title, or was stripped of the title in October because he had travel problems, wasn't able to make a show.
Do you know how they handled that kayfabe-wise?
Yeah, they said he was stripped of the title because he couldn't make it to the show.
So they broke kayfabe, basically.
Japan is much more realistic in things like that.
Gotcha. Was it the match of the night?
I still haven't seen every match of the night. It was a decent match. Let's see, night one. I think probably either the Will Ospreay match was better, or even the Naito match, which we'll talk about shortly. But it was still a decent match.
Yeah, let's move on. Let's segue into the other big match from night one, which was Naito and Jay White went head-to-head for the IWGP Intercontinental Championship. Tell me about that one.
Yep. Well, like I just said, I think that was a better match than the Moxley Archer match. It went a little too long, if I nitpicked a little bit, but Jay White and Naito both are incredible athletes.
I want to ask a little bit about, because a lot of people maybe watching this channel aren't particularly familiar with New Japan style of wrestling. As compared to the brands and the promotions that fans in the United States might be familiar with, specifically WWE, how would you say the New Japan style plays into it? How does the story play into it very much? Would you say it's more or less acrobatic? How would it compare to the product that people are familiar with watching?
Nowadays, it is much closer to what you would see in WWE, or more likely AEW. There are the ones who do the high flying, the crazy moves, the kicking out of finishers 100 times before the end of the match. There is still the Japanese strong style, though, where the hits, the kicks, the suplexes, everything is very tight, very stiff, and really makes you believe they are going all out with each other. We have seen that transition more now into American products. A lot of guys in WWE and in AEW have spent time in Japan now. It's not like it was, 10, 20 years ago.
All right, let's move on to night 2. So we had some return performers, right? Moxley came back and wrestled again on night 2.
Yep. He defended his newly won title against Juice Robinson.
Is that just a gimmicky thing to have the title defended 24 hours after it's won?
Well, again, this is the first time they've ever done the 2-night thing. But, and I don't follow New Japan quite so regularly, but my understanding is they travel, ridiculous schedules all across the country. And sometimes they do, a lot of times they do multiple nights in one location, and they will do, they'll defend the title, or they'll have tag matches or whatever. So yeah, I think it's a pretty regular thing.
Another name that some of the watchers of this show and fans of professional wrestling are going to recognize is Chris Jericho, who took on Hiroshi Tanahashi. This was one that Jericho talked a lot about on his podcast. If anybody listens to the Talk is Jericho podcast, you'd be familiar with this one. And he actually, there was an interesting contingency on this match. What was it?
If Tanahashi beat Jericho, then he would get an AEW title shot.
So, for people that aren't familiar with Tanahashi, how would you describe him? Like, what North American wrestler would you say he most resembles?
I'd say if Hulk Hogan and John Cena had a Japanese baby, it would be Tanahashi.
Science is working on that.
No, he is the megastar of New Japan. He's been wrestling for, I think it's nearly 20 years, if not over 20 years now. He's been champion multiple times. He's won the G1 tournament, I think twice, if not more. He has the prettiest hair of any wrestler in the world. He is a megastar.
And
he makes playing air guitar cool.
And anyone that goes online to try to look up images or videos of this match might be a little bit surprised when they see Jericho. Why don't you explain why they might be surprised?
Yeah, so when he first went to New Japan a couple years ago, he debuted a new gimmick of the Painmaker. It's pretty cool look. He kind of did it a little bit for one of his matches in AEW, but in Japan is when he fully unloads the pain.
Yeah, but it was one of his early matches.
Yeah,
one of his early matches in AEW.
So
don't be surprised. Sting and Chris Jericho had a baby, and it's the Painmaker. Chris Jericho went over, so Tanahashi will not be coming to AEW to perform. Well, let's move on because I think there's some follow-up takeaway questions associated with that match. And the third big one that we want to talk about from night 2, Naito comes back again and takes on Okada, and now is a double champ.
So, like Tanahashi, Okada is a megastar in Japan. A few years ago, he and Kenny Omega, when Kenny was still part of New Japan, had a series of matches that I think one of them, Dave Meltzer pushed to like 6 3/4 stars, the highest rating ever. I mean, their series of matches, they had 3 matches together, and all 3 of them just went above and beyond the last. Okada is an incredible wrestler, and he went into that match as the World Heavyweight Champion, or the IWGP Heavyweight Champion. Naito went in as the newly minted Intercontinental Champion, and surprisingly, Naito won. Became the first ever double champion in New Japan history. It was pretty awesome.
How did the crowd feel about it?
Oh, the crowd was nuts for it. They've been wanting to see Naito as the top champion for, gotta be at least 3-4 years now, if not more. And this has been one of those really slow burn, slow builds to this final moment where he finally captures not just one title, but both. It was pretty exciting. Unfortunately, it was a little bit undermined by, rather than the night ending with this big celebratory happy occasion, shortly after he won the title, he was attacked by Kenta, former WWE Hideo Itami, and set up his next feud with Kenta, and kind of took away from the win a little bit. But prior to that, it was a very good match and really enjoyable watch.
One other honorable mention we want to make note of is Jushin Thunder Liger. Chose to wrestle his last 2 matches, and in extraordinarily good form. He lost both of those matches.
Put over the guys that are staying.
And that's for people that aren't familiar with the wrestling business, that's sort of last act of honor is to sort of kind of lose your last match and put the guys over that are going to be there, right?
Yep.
And I believe he had a 30+ year career.
His first he first started in 1984, the year I was born.
84. So 35, 36 year career. So a huge congratulations to him, a huge thank you to him. Very distinctive look. As a matter of fact, the name didn't ring a bell, and then I did a Google search on it, and just seeing the mask, it all came back to me. He was a hell of a performer, and I hope he spends his free time training the next generation, because they got a lot to learn, and they could definitely learn a lot from him. He could bring a lot of good stuff to the future of wrestling.
Definitely.
So, I just want to ask a little bit of an open-ended question here. What is going on with all these AEW wrestlers going over to Japan and wrestling? It seems like there's some kind of a give and take, right? Like, we take Kenny Omega from Japan, John Moxley goes over there, our champion goes over there.
Yeah.
I mean, is there anything in the works? Are there any plans? What's going on there? That seems weird.
Well, yes, that's kind of it's been a strained relationship, we'll say. When Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks, and Cody Rhodes all left New Japan at the same time to start AEW, New Japan was, we'll say it nicely, greatly offended. For a while, it was reported that AEW, the letters AEW, were banned in the New Japan locker room. So there was a lot of bad blood, hurt feelings in there. Then this, just within the last few months, like you said, Moxley went over there, Jericho went over there. The bad blood is starting to recover, but there's still no talks of a formal relationship in the works. There's still not any plans as of right now for anything further to happen. That being said, Jon Moxley, a contracted AEW wrestler, is New Japan's United States champion. So take from that what you will.
Yeah, I mean, he signed he signed an extended deal with AEW, didn't he? Something like 3 or 5 years?
So he signed a 3-year deal, but he had a 1-year opt-out clause. So he could potentially get out of his contract within the first year. I think that year is up in May. I think that's when he signed the contract.
Yeah, but he wouldn't have to do that in order to defend the United States Championship in Japan, would he? I mean, it's not an exclusivity contract with AEW.
Well, I don't know if it is or not.
He's there wrestling them now.
If there's a New Japan show on the same night as an AEW show, he would have to do the AEW show and then risk being stripped of the title like he was a couple months ago when he couldn't had travel problems out to Japan. So, I don't know. It's kind of a weird situation.
I don't think you'd run into too many issues, though. I mean, you could at least forecast ahead and work around them, because
I would think so.
I mean, especially with AEW's whole "we're not going to wrestle every guy every night" situation, that definitely opens up more opportunities than a company like WWE's, would ever allow.
Right.
So I think there's some opportunity there. I mean, I don't know why he wouldn't want to. I'm not going to say do both. It's easy to say, oh, he'll just fly to Japan once a month.
Well,
but
yeah, reportedly he loves it in Japan. He wants to finish out his career in Japan, most likely. So, as much as I hate to say it, I could see him bowing out of AEW in favor of New Japan.
He definitely brings, he's a very distinct flavor here in the U.S. I mean, it must be like a very distinct flavor compared to the other types of gimmicks and works that you see in Japan.
Yep.
And he must really set himself apart over there. Very unique.
And we didn't mention this, after his match with Juice Robinson, he set up his next rivalry with Minoru Suzuki. Now, for those who don't know who Minoru Suzuki is, he was a professional wrestler who transitioned over to MMA, fought in MMA for 10 years, back in the dark ages. There were no regulations on MMA.
It was before Dana White bought them and brought them into the mainstream.
And then came back to wrestling in the early 2000s. And is just an absolute badass. So that's Moxley's next rivalry in New Japan. It's going to be insane.
Let's talk about the choice to go with a 2-day program. We were discussing, I can't remember if it was on camera or not, but we were discussing recently about the sort of the crazy length of the WrestleMania program, how it's something like 7 hours.
Yeah,
and then an extended beyond that.
Last year, the kickoff show started at 5 o'clock in the evening, and you and I didn't get home until nearly 1.
Yeah, it was after midnight that we left.
Yeah.
And we left. We didn't hang around.
All right.
So, yeah,
So
they got a 7 hour.
hours.
Yeah, I mean, New Japan split it up 2 nights, 4 hours a night. I mean, how do we think that would play off if the WWE chose to go that direction?
I think the trick would be getting the casual fan to sit for 2 separate nights. At least if they're there for the one night, they're more likely to just, sit there, leave it on in the background or whatever. You also run into the risk of the first night being the pre-show, so to speak. You'd really have to structure it so that each night is just as important as the other. So you'd have to have your curtain jerks and then a serious main event for both nights. So that'd be difficult for WWE to do, especially when they don't have the star power that New Japan seemingly has. Or you have guys wrestling 2 nights like New Japan did.
I mean, it does allow for some interesting things, like you could do some sort of battle royale on night 1 that leads to a title defense on night 2.
Or a tournament.
Especially in a world where you're not announcing the matches necessarily really far in advance. So it might give you an opportunity to really take that first night and try and build a lot of tension in a brief period of time, and then have it pop the next night, make it like the main event for the next night or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Could be an interesting one. But yeah, I mean, except for maybe the curtain jerk or something like that, pretty much, and some of the pre-show matches. I mean, all the matches at WrestleMania would headline, any other show, any other pay-per-view. Certainly any other show, but mostly pay-per-views. I
mean, you could theoretically split it up. Night 1 is the Raw WrestleMania, night 2 is the SmackDown WrestleMania. Have your top champions main event both shows.
Yeah, I think you run some risk there. I mean, the quality of the programming isn't necessarily the same.
Right.
Where do you put the NXT guys?
Well, NXT has TakeOver.
Yeah, I really think you have to pull them into the WrestleMania. Now that they're on television, they're considered a co-equal promotion. I mean, they're co-equal, but they don't get a spot at WrestleMania. It's just, especially when you give them a spot at Survivor Series, it just wouldn't make any sense.
I think that's...
And if you're going to add extra matches, so it was 7 hours when NXT wasn't there. Now you've added NXT. We're looking at an 8 or a 9-hour show. It's becoming like a festival, so...
Yep.
And, I mean, it's gonna draw fans, because remember, I don't want to get too far off topic here, but WrestleMania is like a week-long festival, that ends right with the crescendo is the WrestleMania event, but there's a multi-day long festival.
It even goes beyond that to the Raw after WrestleMania now.
Right, with events and meet and greets and expos, and people go there to sell their tchotchkes, and you can walk around, hang out, meet people, like there's events to do and stuff. So it's become like a real Comic-Con type event that sort of hits its crescendo with the WrestleMania event. So I think there's a lot of things you could sell. You could sell more tickets, right? You could sell out 2 events instead of just 1. I think that pretty much no matter what, WrestleMania is going to sell out as long as you do the card right.
Yep.
WrestleMania is going to sell out. So, you could make them 3, 4, 5 days apart and have even more epic matches, or you could do them back to back the way that New Japan did. If you're trying to drive subscriptions, I think that this is going to be a way to prop up the ticket sales, which, as we've reported in other financial videos, the ticket sales are relatively weak because they're doing less shows in general. They're doing less shows. So you're seeing ticket sales sort of slumping a little bit, this would be a great way. Q2 always rides on WrestleMania's back. If you look at any of the financial spreadsheets, there's always a little bump in Q2, a little WrestleMania hump that they get, and this would just, find a way to make that hump a little bit bigger. And Lord knows they've got a locker room that's big enough to do something like that.
Yeah, if only they would use them.
For me, it's a no-brainer. So let's wrap this up. What was this show better than WrestleMania's going to be?
Well, again, I still haven't watched every match yet, so I can't say for sure.
Was this show better than last year's WrestleMania?
Ooh.
That sounds like a yes.
It's pretty close. Yeah. Again, if I'm being nitpicky, some of the matches tend to go a little long, but overall, yeah, I think it might have been better than
and
last WrestleMania.
if there's one match we want a fan of this show to go and watch, what match would that be?
Jeez. Well, again, of the ones we spoke of, I'd say probably have to be the Naito versus Okada.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was an excellent match.
Great. So in conclusion, it was a hell of a show. We want to encourage anybody that is maybe a little bit familiar with New Japan Pro Wrestling or has no experience whatsoever with it to go and check out those matches. All of them if you can, but certainly check out the one we recommended because, we live in a world of professional wrestling in the United States right now where everything is sort of sounds the same, tastes the same. There's no real surprises. And there's a whole world of opportunity out there. New characters, new storylines, new concepts, new styles, new gimmicks. There's a lot of really exciting stuff that's happening down in Mexico and over in Japan that you really want to expose yourself to. And 15, 20 years ago, it really wasn't an option for people in the United States to, get their hands on another product and really sink their teeth in. And companies like WCW and WWE really took advantage of that. But today, with the magic of the internet, you can expose yourself to that kind of product anytime, any place, anywhere, as long as you got an internet connection. So we strongly encourage anyone that's a fan of professional wrestling and might be a little disappointed with the product that they've been receiving so far via AEW or WWE to not hesitate to reach out and check out New Japan Pro Wrestling. You're going to see some familiar faces and you're going to see a lot of new stuff. But either way, I think that if you're a fan of pro wrestling, we think you're really going to enjoy it. So,
Definitely.
So until next time, follow the money, always keep kayfabe, and we'll keep wrestling with the business.